viewers, to hear a new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Jethro Tull, and I've had some requests to feature some of Tull's music. And once again, these guys are essential progressive rock, pioneers and legends. They formed in Blackpool, England in 1967, and definitely helped spearhead and revolutionize rock music and progressive music in the late 60s and throughout the 70s. And they're still active today. But they've had 22 studio albums or something like that, and they've had some member and personnel changes. But without question, Jethro Tull influenced everybody on the scene. Highly, pioneering and influential, and definitely kind of restructured and reshaped rock music for everybody. Great band. So in the guitar department, you have the classic, prog rock guitar legend, Martin Barre, and he's definitely overlooked and forgotten, I think, by a lot of musicians these days. But back in the day, he definitely pioneered and influenced everybody. And he played with Jethro Tull from 1968 until 2012, so he was the long-standing guitarist in the band. And Ian Anderson, who also plays flute, and he did lead vocals, and he also plays acoustic guitar. But Martin was the electric guitarist, sometimes would play acoustic, but mainly electric guitar, the solos and riffs and licks and stuff that you hear in their songs. A very interesting guitarist, and he's still active today. He's not working with Jethro Tull. But Martin's definitely a legend of the guitar, a progressive rock, and definitely was the six-string voice of Jethro Tull. I always found it really interesting the way Ian Anderson and Martin Barre worked together as far as guitar. Ian was singing and also played flute, but when he would play acoustic guitar, Martin always found these strategic ways of, adding electric guitar to those acoustic guitar parts, and that's so cool, and we're going to hit some of that in this lesson. But like I said, there's something really magical about that chemistry and that musical kind of kinship between Ian Anderson and Martin Barre. Really cool stuff. So the music in this episode came from two Jethro Tull albums, and they're two of my favorites, Stand Up and Aqualung. And like I mentioned a moment ago, they have 22 albums, so there's a mountain of music to go through. So I just locked on to two of my favorites, Stand Up and Aqualung. And there's some great, stuff on those two albums, not to mention their entire discography. But there's going to be a lot of, it's kind of a half and half lesson. Half electric, half acoustic. So we're going to start with the electric stuff. Somewhere right in the middle of the lesson, it's going to shift to acoustic and electric. And then we're going to make the full shift to acoustic by the end. So here we go. With the opening, that's A New Day Yesterday from the album Stand Up, and it's something like this. So it's pretty basic, but it starts with this chromatic walk-up, and the first guitar is doing this. Pretty easy, but that A sharp, B, and then D sharp, E. And then you just loop that over and over. Second guitar comes in after that climb up. When it hits the E, then you hear an E major bar chord right there slid off, and sometimes it's a power chord, sometimes it's a a bar chord, major bar chord, and then you hear, and it's kind of matching or harmonizing with that other guitar part. So that's really cool, like this. Next up is Locomotive Breath from Aqualung, and who knew that open position chords could sound so aggressive and badass? Well, I guess The Who and AC/DC and a bunch of other bands knew that, but definitely a classic song, and there's so much attitude with this guitar part like this. like that, just banging out chords right there. So you hear a strummed E minor, there's a piano kind of guitar solo intro. You hear that really quiet E minor strummed, and then you hear the volume distinctly, you know, kind of brought up, and it starts roaring, you know, or whatever. But then you literally hear, you know, 3 bangs on E minor, G, D, back to E minor, and then that percussive strum, like that. And then you start that kind of tick-tock, and then you do it again. Like that. And so much attitude. Go to B and then bang on that B, D, back to E minor. You know, classic, timeless song. And that's a really basic riff, but there's so, like I said, so much attitude and aggression in that riff. Really cool. Next up is Living in the Past from the album Stand Up, and this is really interesting. I'm actually using just my fingers and kind of brushing the strings instead of using a pick, but it's something like this. So it starts with C minor. There's actually a flute and percussion, and then the guitar kind of quietly comes in after a couple repeats, but it's quietly just strumming through, you know, the C minor to F major progression right there. And I'm really just hearing, you know, the D, the G, and the B strings. I'm not really hearing full chords at all. I'm not really even hearing the high E. I'm really just hearing, you know, those 3 strings of the chord. Like that, C minor to that little partial F. And then you hear this F to E flat, B flat to C minor. And then back to C minor. And do that again, F, E flat, B flat, C minor. Bang on that C minor, and then you're hearing this F to G, and then you're hearing a D minor 7 right there, and then you hear D major to G major. Basically the intro, the verse starts right there. It's an interesting guitar part, and those little partial chords kind of fanned or strummed lightly like that. Really cool, that Latin kind of feel or groove to it. Cool song, classic song. Next up is We Used to Know from the album Stand Up. This is really interesting. So it's half electric, half acoustic. So the electric guitar part we're going to focus on first, and then I'm going to add the strummed acoustic guitar part. And there's a chord progression underlying the whole thing. So the chord progression is basically like this. It's E minor to B major, and then D major to A major, and then C major to G major, and then F sharp major to B major, and that's the chord progression. And then the electric guitar is actually doing this. So that's E minor, and then we're going to move to B. So there's B major, so that first part. sus2 to D major, right? And then A sus4 to A major, and then it's going to move to C major, and you're kind of playing with C sus4 right there, that E to F, and then G, and you're going to slide that 6th right there. Then you're going to hear this hammer on F sharp from that A to that B flat, or A sharp, I mean, A to A sharp. slide sixth right there. And then you're going to go back to this. And you're going to end on B right there. And it's like a little trill. So that whole guitar part. With a TC Electronic Ditto looper, but now I'm going to grab my acoustic and show you the full part. So now I grab my acoustic guitar, I'm going to follow that electric part that I've looped with the looper, but once again the chord progression there, E minor to B major, D major to A major, C major to G major, and then F sharp major to B major. And I'm not going to plug in or anything. Hopefully the balance will be okay where you can hear both the electric and acoustic like this. Interplay like that between guitars, you know, where they're both, you know, playing together, but they're doing completely different things. So cool. Next up is the song Reasons for Waiting from the album Stand Up, and it's something like this. With this E major, and we're kind of rolling in from this F sharp G to G sharp right there. Like a little chromatic move. And then I'm hearing this progression all right here. I've seen transcriptions of this where they moved around, you know, on the fretboard, but I'm hearing this just kind of small, you know, little area on the neck right there. So grab that G sharp and that B right there, and that's E major. Just those bottom three strings. Then you're going to flip that to this, and that's going to feel like a G5 over E. But if you really think about the notes we're playing there, that's basically an E minor 7 implied. Like that. Because there's all your necessary notes. You know, E, an octave of G, and that open D string. So an implied E minor 7, like that. Like that. It's really just those bottom four strings. Then you're going to flip over here, and that's basically an A major over E. Like that. Because you got that open A, that C sharp, and that E, also the low E open in there too. And go back to that E major. Like that. Last but not least is the song My God from Aqualung, and this is a classic acoustic guitar intro, like this. It's basically an A octave right there in the beginning, and then you're hearing this accelerando, and he's basically starting with just that octave, start going a little faster, and then you hear this hammer on from that G to A, start going faster, and then you hear this different kind of rhythm. this really crafty kind of pull-off pattern. So think of A minor right there, and then you're going to pull off on the G and the B string, that open, or I'm sorry, that C note to the open G, and that fretted E to the open B, like that. And then right there you're going to grab this, and that's like an implied A7 sus2 right there. Vamp of that intro. And then you hear that same little, kind of does like the second part a little different. And then right there, you hear that, which that's definitely going to wake up the neighbors. That's an A7 sharp 11 right there. You know, almost like the A7, what A7 sus2 we had a second ago, but that B note on the G strings moved over to that D sharp, which is your sharp 11. You know, really eye-opening chord right there. You know, really cool. And I love stuff like that where it's kind of dreamlike and really different. There's some tension and resolution. You know, really cool stuff. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Jethro Tull, and definitely keep the requests coming because I had a lot of requests to feature Jethro Tull and Martin Barre's, you know, music, and of course Ian Anderson too. And it's really interesting, like I mentioned earlier, that interplay between the acoustic guitar and electric guitar and Jethro Tull's music. And I was tempted to hit, you know, some music from Thick as a Brick and some of those albums, but Ian started to slap on a capo, you know, for some of those songs. And I didn't really want to get into different tunings or capos and stuff like that. I really just wanted to shift, you know, from electric to acoustic music in this episode, which it basically kind of did. We started electric and ended acoustic. And that's, you know, something you can kind of pick up from Jethro Tull's music. There's lots of diversity and, you know, lots of different, you know, instrumentation in their songs. And there's nothing quite like a rockin' tune. And then when the solo section comes along, you don't hear a guitar, you know, you hear a flute, you know, just riffing and jamming. And then you hear a guitar like take over or play a solo. But that's just, you know, kind of shocking when you're not used to hearing that instrument, you know, in a rock music setting. So I don't know if you want to consider Jethro Tull folk, you know, progressive folk or something like that. But there's definitely a folky element mixed with the rock and progressive side of things too. A little bit of classical, a little bit of jazz mixed in too. But definitely, you know, great band, legendary band. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.